American Top 40.
We're counting down the biggest hits of the 1980s, and they get bigger and bigger. Next is the biggest hit of the 1980s for the English supergroup, The Police. And their lead singer, Sting, calls it the nastiest song he's ever written. Quote, "It's really quite evil, about surveillance and controlling another person. The fact that it was couched in a seductive and romantic disguise made it all the more sinister for me." End of quote. Here's the fourth most popular song of the 1980s. Every Breath You Take. The Police with the #1 song of the year in 1983. It spent 8 weeks on top back then. Now it's the fourth top hit of the decade and the biggest hit by a group.
Casey's Coast to Coast. Casey's Top 40.
I'm Casey Kasem. Now, we're up to the #1 British hit of the 1980s, and it's a song written by a former English teacher in just 10 minutes. That former English teacher is Sting. As we've told you before, he wrote this song during a period of great personal anguish. He was wrestling with the end of a very difficult relationship and decided to take a vacation on the Caribbean island of Jamaica. One hot tropical night in Jamaica, he woke up out of a sound sleep and sat straight up in bed. There was a song going through his head, a haunting melody that he'd never heard before. He got up, walked across the room to the piano, sat down, and started playing. First, it was just chords. Then his fingers started to play a tune. Then words came into his head. They were strong words, words that made him feel sad. But Sting says it was a wonderful sadness because writing those words was a big emotional release. It took just 10 minutes to complete that song. But when he was done, Sting had written the biggest British hit of the decade. The #1 British hit of the 1980s on Casey's Top 40 is Every Breath You Take by The Police. Well, there it is, the #1 British hit of the 1980s on Casey's Top 40, Every Breath You Take by Andy Summers, Stuart Copeland, and Sting, The Police.
Casey's Coast to Coast. Casey's Top 40.
I'm Casey Kasem. Today we're counting down the 40 biggest million sellers of the 1980s. Sting, the man who wrote and sings million seller number 13, says it might sound like a pretty love song, but it's not. It's actually a nasty song about possessiveness and surveillance. Here's Sting with his band The Police and Every Breath You Take. From their quadruple platinum album, Synchronicity, those are The Police and Every Breath You Take. It's the 13th biggest million seller of the 1980s, as our survey of the biggest selling singles of the 80s rolls on.
Casey's Top